Imagine discovering that your entire life has been built on a lie. In just a few minutes, you'll witness how one man's world crumbles and rebuilds itself, challenging his own beliefs. This isn't just a story, it's a mirror into his own hidden truths, and will it heal old wounds or open new ones? Discover how one letter can rewrite an entire life and reveal the true meaning of family. Welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Thomas Hartley's hands trembled as he held the cream-colored envelope. The return address, written in an elegant script, belonged to someone he'd never heard of, Sophia Reynolds. Yet, something about it made his heart race. He carefully opened it, his breath catching as he unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Mr. Hartley," it began, "I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Sophia Reynolds, and I believe I am your daughter." Thomas felt the world spin around him. Daughter? Impossible. He'd never had children, or so he thought. As he continued reading, fragments of his past flashed before his eyes. Sarah, his college sweetheart, her radiant smile, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed. Their whirlwind romance during that magical summer of '88. And then, nothing. She'd vanished without a trace, leaving Thomas heartbroken and confused. He'd tried to find her, of course, but it was as if she'd disappeared into thin air. Eventually, he'd moved on, burying the pain deep inside and throwing himself into his career. Now, 35 years later, this letter threatened to unravel everything. Sophia explained that she'd only recently discovered Thomas was her father. Her mother, Sarah, had passed away a few months ago, and among her belongings, Sophia had found old letters and photographs that revealed the truth of her parentage. Thomas felt a mix of emotions wash over him: shock, anger, grief, and a strange sense of longing. He'd missed out on so much. A daughter. He had a daughter. The letter ended with Sophia's contact information and a tentative invitation to meet. "I understand if this comes as a shock," she wrote, "and I'll respect your wishes if you'd rather not pursue a relationship. But if you're open to it, I'd love the chance to get to know you." Thomas read the letter again and again, his mind reeling. Could this be real? Or was it some elaborate hoax? He needed answers, but he wasn't sure he was ready for them. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his living room, Thomas finally set the letter down. He walked to the window, gazing out at the bustling city below. His comfortable, predictable life suddenly felt like a facade. Everything he thought he knew about himself, his past, his future, it had all changed in the span of a few paragraphs. With a deep breath, he made a decision. He would meet Sophia. He owed it to her, to Sarah's memory, and to himself to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The following days passed in a blur for Thomas. He found himself distracted at work, his mind constantly wandering back to Sophia's letter. His colleagues at the architectural firm noticed his unusual behavior, but he brushed off their concerns with vague excuses about not feeling well. In truth, he felt as if he were living in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. He'd always prided himself on his self-control, on the carefully ordered life he'd built. Now, that life felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. During his lunch breaks, Thomas found himself poring over old photo albums he'd tucked away years ago. There she was, Sarah, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, her smile as bright as he remembered. How could he have forgotten the intensity of his feelings for her? And how could she have kept their child a secret from him? The hurt and betrayal mingled with a growing curiosity about Sophia. What was she like? Did she have Sarah's laugh, her kind eyes? Or did she take after him in some way? As the week progressed, Thomas's apartment began to feel claustrophobic. He needed air, space to think. On Saturday morning, he found himself wandering through Oakwood Park, the very place where he and Sarah had spent countless hours during that fateful summer. The old oak trees seemed to whisper secrets as he passed, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. He paused by the lake, watching the sunlight dance on the water's surface. It was here, on a warm August night, that he'd told Sarah he loved her for the first time. Lost in his memories, Thomas almost missed the vibration of his phone. A text message from an unknown number. "Hi, Mr. Hartley, it's Sophia. I hope you received my letter. I understand if you need time, but I wanted to let you know that I'll be in the city next weekend if you'd like to meet." Thomas's heart raced as he read the message. This was it, the moment of truth. Could he face this reality, or would he choose to retreat into the safety of his familiar life? With trembling fingers, Thomas typed out a reply. Hello, Sophia. Thank you for reaching out. I did receive your letter, and I've been processing the information. I would like to meet you when you're in town. Perhaps we could have coffee? He hesitated for a moment before hitting send. As soon as the message was gone, a mix of anticipation and fear washed over him. There was no turning back now. For better or worse, his life was about to change forever. The week leading up to his meeting with Sophia felt like the longest of Thomas's life. He vacillated between excitement and dread, imagining countless scenarios of how their encounter might unfold. Would there be an instant connection, or would they sit in awkward silence, strangers bound by blood but separated by years of absence? He chose a quiet cafe for their meeting, a place where they could talk without too many prying eyes or interruptions. As Saturday approached, Thomas found himself paying extra attention to his appearance, trimming his salt and pepper beard, and selecting a crisp blue shirt that Sarah had always said brought out his eyes. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and Thomas looked up from his coffee. His breath caught in his throat as a young woman entered, her eyes scanning the room. He knew instantly it was Sophia. She had Sarah's delicate features, but her eyes, those were unmistakably his. Their gazes met, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. Sophia approached his table, a tentative smile on her face. "Mr. Hartley?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Thomas stood, his heart pounding. "Please, call me Thomas," he replied, gesturing for her to take a seat. As they settled into their chairs, an awkward silence fell between them. Thomas cleared his throat, searching for the right words. I'm glad you reached out, Sophia," he began. "I must admit, your letter came as quite a shock." Sophia nodded, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I can imagine," she said. "It was a shock for me too, when I found out. Mom, she never told me about you. Not until the end." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Thomas felt a pang of sympathy. Whatever anger he'd felt towards Sarah began to melt away in the face of their shared loss. They talked for hours, their coffees growing cold as they shared stories and filled in the gaps of their separate lives. Thomas learned that Sophia was a pediatric nurse, that she had her mother's love for music and his own passion for sketching. She told him about growing up in a small town upstate, about Sarah's struggle with illness in recent years. In turn, Thomas shared stories of his own life, his career in architecture, his travels, the family he'd never quite managed to build. As the afternoon wore on, he found himself marveling at the young woman before him, seeing glimpses of Sarah and himself reflected in her mannerisms and expressions. As the cafe began to fill with the dinner crowd, Thomas realized how much time had passed. "I can't believe it's been hours," he said, glancing at his watch. Sophia smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I should probably get going. I have a train to catch tomorrow morning." Thomas felt a sudden panic at the thought of her leaving. "When will you be back in the city?" he asked, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. Sophia hesitated, then said, "I'm not sure, but I'd like to stay in touch if that's okay with you." Thomas nodded eagerly. "I'd like that very much," he replied, feeling a glimmer of hope for the future. As they said their goodbyes, Thomas realized that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. In the weeks following their first meeting, Thomas and Sophia began to build a tentative relationship through phone calls and text messages. Their conversations, initially awkward and filled with long pauses, gradually became more natural. Thomas found himself looking forward to their Sunday evening calls, eager to hear about Sophia's week and share bits of his own life. He learned that she had a dry sense of humor, much like his own, and a passion for photography that reminded him of Sarah's artistic side. One evening, as they chatted about Sophia's latest challenging case at the hospital, Thomas felt a surge of pride. "You know, your compassion for your patients, it reminds me of your mother," he said softly. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Thomas worried he'd overstepped. But then Sophia replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Really? I always hoped I was making her proud." The moment felt significant, a small bridge forming over the vast canyon of their shared history. As autumn turned to winter, Thomas found himself reevaluating his life. His apartment, once a sanctuary of order and solitude, now felt empty. He caught himself imagining Sophia there, wondering what she'd think of his collection of architectural sketches or the old record player he'd kept from his college days. One snowy Saturday, feeling particularly nostalgic, he dug out a box of mementos from his relationship with Sarah. Among the faded photographs and ticket stubs, he found a small velvet box containing a ring he'd never had the chance to give her. The discovery of the ring brought a fresh wave of questions and regrets. Why had Sarah left? What had scared her away? Thomas realized that despite the progress he and Sophia had made, there was still so much left unsaid, so many mysteries to unravel. He debated whether to bring up these questions with Sophia, unsure if it would strengthen their budding relationship or create new barriers between them. The weight of the past seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. As Christmas approached, Thomas received an unexpected invitation from Sophia. "I was wondering," she said during one of their calls, her voice hesitant, "if you'd like to come visit me for New Year's. I could show you around my town and, well, I have some of Mom's things I thought you might like to see." Thomas felt a mix of excitement and apprehension at the prospect. This would be a big step, entering Sophia's world, seeing the life Sarah had built without him. After a moment's hesitation, he found himself agreeing. As he hung up the phone, Thomas realized that the coming year would bring changes he never could have anticipated. The small town of Millbrook was blanketed in snow when Thomas arrived on New Year's Eve. As he stepped off the train, he spotted Sophia waiting on the platform, bundled up in a red scarf that brought out the warmth in her cheeks. She waved, a mixture of nervousness and excitement in her smile. "Welcome to Millbrook," she said as she gave him a slightly awkward hug. Thomas felt a lump in his throat, struck by how natural and yet how strange this moment felt. Sophia gave him a tour of the town, pointing out landmarks from her childhood, the elementary school where she'd had her first art show, the park where she'd learned to ride a bike. As they walked, Thomas couldn't help but imagine Sarah in these places, living a life parallel to his own. They ended up at a cozy diner for lunch, where the waitress greeted Sophia by name and gave Thomas a curious look. "Friend of yours, Soph?" she asked, her tone friendly but inquisitive. Sophia hesitated for a moment before replying, "This is Thomas, my father." The words hung in the air, and Thomas felt a rush of emotions, pride, sadness, a sense of belonging he hadn't expected. The waitress, to her credit, recovered quickly, welcoming Thomas warmly. As they ate, Sophia shared more stories of growing up in Millbrook, and Thomas found himself both grateful for these glimpses into her life and acutely aware of all he had missed. The easy conversation they'd developed over the phone felt strained in person, the weight of their shared history more palpable. After lunch, they made their way to Sophia's small house on the outskirts of town. As they entered, Thomas was immediately struck by how much the place reminded him of Sarah. There were splashes of bright colors everywhere, eclectic art on the walls, and shelves filled with books, a perfect blend of order and chaos that was so quintessentially Sarah. Sophia led him to the living room, where a box sat on the coffee table. "These are some of Mom's things," she said softly. I thought you might like to see them." With trembling hands, Thomas began to go through the box. There were old journals, photographs he'd never seen, and to his surprise, letters addressed to him that had never been sent. As he read through Sarah's words, the full story of why she'd left began to unfold. She'd been scared, overwhelmed by the intensity of their relationship and the unexpected pregnancy. Her strict parents had pressured her to do the right thing and marry, but Sarah, fiercely independent, had balked at the idea of being trapped. So she'd run, intending to sort out her feelings, but never finding the courage to return. Thomas felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, understanding, and a deep, aching regret for the years they'd lost. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Thomas and Sophia sat in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The revelations from Sarah's letters hung heavy in the air between them. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I had no idea about any of this." Thomas looked at her, seeing the guilt and confusion in her eyes. He reached out, hesitantly placing his hand over hers. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said firmly. "We were all victims of circumstance and fear." They talked late into the night, sharing their feelings about Sarah's choices and the impact they'd had on both their lives. Thomas spoke of his initial anger and hurt upon receiving Sophia's letter, and how those feelings had transformed into gratitude for the chance to know his daughter. Sophia, in turn, shared her conflicted emotions about her mother. The love she felt, tinged with disappointment at the secrets Sarah had kept. As they talked, Thomas felt a shift in their relationship, a deepening understanding and connection. At midnight, they stepped outside to watch the town's modest fireworks display. The cold air was bracing, and Thomas found himself putting an arm around Sophia's shoulders. She leaned into him, and for a moment, he could almost imagine that they'd always been this way, father and daughter, united against the world. "Happy New Year, Dad," Sophia said softly, testing out the word. Thomas felt his heart swell. "Happy New Year, sweetheart," he replied, the endearment feeling both foreign and right on his lips. The next morning, as Thomas prepared to return to the city, there was a new ease between them. They made plans for Sophia to visit him in a few weeks, both eager to continue building their relationship. As he boarded the train, Thomas felt a mix of emotions: sadness at leaving, excitement for the future, and a profound sense of gratitude for this unexpected second chance at family. He watched Millbrook disappear into the distance, knowing that a part of his heart would always remain in this small town where his daughter had grown up. Back in the city, Thomas found himself reevaluating his life with fresh eyes. His apartment, once a testament to his solitary existence, now felt like a blank canvas waiting to be filled with new memories. He cleared out a spare room, envisioning it as a space for Sophia when she visited. As he sorted through his belongings, he came across old sketches of buildings he'd once dreamed of designing, dreams he'd set aside in favor of a more practical career. With a jolt of inspiration, he realized it wasn't too late to pursue those dreams, to create a legacy he could share with his daughter. As winter melted into spring, Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. Inspired by his reconnection with Sophia, he decided to take a leap of faith in his professional life. He approached his firm's partners with a bold proposal: a new division focused on sustainable, community-oriented architecture. To his surprise and delight, they embraced the idea enthusiastically. Suddenly, Thomas found himself leading a team of young, idealistic architects, their energy reminding him of his own passion when he first entered the field. One sunny afternoon, as Thomas was poring over plans for a new community center, his phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. "Big news," it read. "Got offered a position at Children's Hospital in the city. Thinking of taking it. Thoughts?" Thomas's heart raced with excitement and a touch of anxiety. The prospect of having Sophia nearby was thrilling, but he worried about pressuring her. He crafted a careful response. "That's wonderful news. It's a great opportunity. Whatever you decide, I'm here to support you." Over the next few weeks, Thomas and Sophia had several long conversations about the potential move. Sophia was excited about the career opportunity, but nervous about leaving the only home she'd ever known. Thomas offered to help her find an apartment, careful to give her space to make her own decision. When Sophia finally decided to take the job, Thomas felt a mix of joy and trepidation. Their relationship had grown stronger, but it was still fragile. Would the reality of living in the same city bring them closer together or expose the cracks in their newly formed bond? As Sophia's moving day approached, Thomas threw himself into preparations. He helped her find a cozy apartment not far from his own, and spent weekends scouring flea markets for furniture and decor that he thought she might like. One evening, as he was assembling a bookshelf for her new place, he came across a photo album he hadn't seen before. Inside were pictures of Sophia as a child, her first day of school, birthday parties, dance recitals. Thomas felt a familiar pang of regret for all the moments he'd missed. Pushing aside the melancholy, Thomas focused on the future. He planned a welcome dinner for Sophia's first night in the city, carefully selecting recipes and even practicing his rusty cooking skills. As he stirred a pot of Sarah's favorite pasta sauce, a recipe Sophia had shared, he realized how much his life had changed in just a few short months. The empty spaces in his heart and home were slowly being filled, and for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. Sophia's arrival in the city marked a new chapter for both her and Thomas. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of activity, helping her settle into her new apartment, showing her around the neighborhood, and introducing her to his favorite spots in the city. Thomas delighted in seeing the city through Sophia's eyes, rediscovering its magic and energy. They fell into a comfortable routine of weekly dinners and weekend outings, gradually building the relationship they'd been denied for so long. However, as the initial excitement of the move wore off, new challenges emerged. Sophia struggled to adjust to the pace of city life and the demands of her new job. There were nights when she called Thomas, homesick and overwhelmed, and he found himself at a loss for how to comfort her. He wanted to protect her, to solve all her problems, but he knew she needed to find her own way. It was a delicate balance, being supportive without being overbearing, and Thomas often worried he was falling short. One rainy Sunday afternoon, Thomas invited Sophia over to see his latest architectural project. As they pored over the plans, Sophia's eyes lit up with interest. "This community garden design? It reminds me of something Mom used to talk about," she said softly. Thomas looked up, surprised. "Your mother was interested in urban planning?" Sophia nodded, a wistful smile on her face. She had all these ideas about creating green spaces in cities. She used to sketch designs in her spare time. The revelation sparked a long conversation about Sarah's dreams and passions, many of which Thomas had never known about. As they talked, he felt a renewed sense of loss for the life they could have had together, but also a deep gratitude for this chance to know Sarah through their daughter's eyes. Later that evening, after Sophia had gone home, Thomas found himself sketching ideas for a memorial garden, inspired by Sarah's vision and dedicated to second chances. As spring turned to summer, Thomas noticed subtle changes in Sophia. She seemed more confident, more at ease in her new surroundings. She started inviting him to meet her colleagues and friends, proudly introducing him as her father. Each time she did, Thomas felt a surge of emotion, pride, love, and a lingering disbelief that this remarkable young woman was his daughter. But with these joyful moments came new complications. How much should he involve himself in her life? Was he overstepping when he offered advice or help? The boundaries of their relationship were still blurry, and both father and daughter were learning to navigate them day by day. As summer reached its peak, Thomas received an unexpected call from his old college friend Michael. "Tom, you'll never guess what I found while cleaning out my attic," Michael said excitedly. "Remember that road trip we took the summer before senior year? I've got a whole box of photos and mementos, including some of you and Sarah." Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. That road trip had been just weeks before Sarah disappeared from his life. "I'd love to see them," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Meeting Michael for coffee turned into an afternoon of reminiscing and rediscovery. As they sifted through the old photos, Thomas was transported back to that carefree summer. There was Sarah, laughing as she dipped her toes in a mountain stream, her hair wild in the wind. Another showed Thomas and Sarah dancing at a small-town festival, lost in each other's eyes. "You two were something special," Michael said softly. "I never understood why she left." Thomas nodded, the old pain mingling with his new understanding of Sarah's fears and struggles. That evening, Thomas called Sophia and invited her over. When she arrived, he spread the photos out on the coffee table. "I thought you might like to see these," he said gently. Sophia's eyes widened as she took in the images of her young parents, so clearly in love. She picked up a photo of Sarah, tracing her mother's face with a finger. "She looks so happy here," Sophia murmured. "So free." They spent hours going through the photos, with Thomas sharing stories of that summer, and Sophia offering insights into the woman Sarah had become. As the night wore on, their conversation turned to deeper topics. Sophia confessed her lingering anger at her mother for keeping Thomas a secret, while Thomas shared his own struggle to reconcile the Sarah he'd known with the woman who had kept his daughter from him. It was a difficult, emotional discussion, but as they talked, both father and daughter felt a weight lifting. They were finally confronting the shadows of the past that had haunted their relationship from the beginning. In the early hours of the morning, as Sophia prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Dad," she said, the words still new on her lips. "I'm glad we found each other. Despite everything, I'm really glad." Thomas felt his eyes well up with tears. He pulled Sophia into a hug, holding her tightly. "So am I, sweetheart," he whispered. So am I. As he watched her walk down the hallway, Thomas felt a sense of peace settle over him. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was full of promise. As autumn painted the city in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas and Sophia's relationship continued to evolve. They had settled into a comfortable rhythm, with regular dinners and weekend outings becoming cherished traditions. Thomas found himself looking forward to their time together, his once solitary life now filled with the warmth of family. However, as their bond deepened, new challenges emerged, testing the strength of their newfound connection. One crisp October evening, Thomas invited Sophia to dinner at his apartment. As they sat down to eat, he noticed she seemed distracted, her usual animated chatter subdued. "Is everything all right?" he asked, concern etching his features. Sophia hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I've been offered a position on a medical mission in Guatemala," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. "It's a 6-month program, starting in January." Thomas felt his heart sink, even as he tried to muster a supportive smile. The news of Sophia's potential departure sparked a whirlwind of emotions for Thomas. He was proud of her dedication to her work and her desire to make a difference in the world. Yet the thought of her leaving, just as they were growing closer, filled him with a sense of loss. He found himself torn between encouraging her to take this incredible opportunity and selfishly wanting her to stay. Their conversations in the following weeks were tinged with an underlying tension, neither fully expressing their conflicting feelings. As Sophia grappled with her decision, Thomas threw himself into his work, focusing on the community center project that had become his passion. One afternoon, as he was reviewing plans at a local cafe, he overheard a heated conversation at a nearby table. A young woman was arguing with an older man, their words striking a chord with Thomas. "You can't keep trying to control my life, Dad," the woman exclaimed. "I'm an adult. I can make my own decisions." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine, recognizing echoes of his own fears about his relationship with Sophia. The incident at the cafe forced Thomas to confront his own behavior. Had he been too overbearing, too eager to make up for lost time? Was he inadvertently pushing Sophia away in his attempt to hold on to her? That evening, he called Sophia and asked her to meet him at the park where they had first reconnected. As they walked along the lamplit paths, Thomas finally opened up about his fears and insecurities. To his surprise and relief, Sophia shared similar concerns, and together they began to navigate the delicate balance of their evolving relationship. The weeks leading up to Sophia's departure for Guatemala were bittersweet. Thomas and Sophia made the most of their time together, creating new memories while also addressing the unspoken tensions that had arisen. They visited museums, tried new restaurants, and spent long evenings talking about their hopes and fears for the future. Thomas found himself opening up about his own youthful dreams of traveling the world, dreams he had set aside in pursuit of a stable career. On a chilly December afternoon, Thomas took Sophia to see the progress on the community center. As they walked through the half-finished building, he explained his vision for the space, his eyes alight with passion. Sophia listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering suggestions. At one point, she stopped and turned to Thomas, her expression serious. "Dad," she said, "I want you to know that this mission, it's not about running away. I'm coming back. You're my family now, and I don't want to lose that." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. He pulled Sophia into a tight hug, feeling the weight of unspoken words between them. "I know, sweetheart," he murmured, "and I'll be here, cheering you on every step of the way." As they continued their tour, Thomas realized that letting Sophia go was not about losing her, but about supporting her growth and independence. He thought back to Sarah, wondering if things might have been different if she had felt the same freedom to pursue her dreams. The night before Sophia's departure, Thomas hosted a small going-away party at his apartment. As he watched Sophia laughing with her friends, he felt a surge of pride and love. Later, when the guests had left, Sophia presented Thomas with a gift, a beautifully bound sketchbook. "For your travels," she explained with a smile. "I thought maybe you could visit me in Guatemala, see some of those places you've always dreamed about." Thomas was touched by the gesture, recognizing it as both an invitation and a promise of future adventures together. As they said their goodbyes at the airport the next morning, Thomas felt a mix of sadness and hope. He hugged Sophia tightly, whispering words of encouragement and love. As he watched her disappear through the security gate, he realized that their relationship had entered a new phase. They were no longer just a father and daughter making up for lost time, but two adults forging a deep and lasting bond across the distances of both time and space. The months of Sophia's absence flew by in a flurry of activity for Thomas. He threw himself into his work, overseeing the completion of the community center and starting new projects inspired by his renewed passion for socially conscious architecture. He and Sophia stayed in touch through regular video calls and messages, sharing their experiences and growing closer despite the physical distance between them. Thomas found himself looking at the world with fresh eyes, inspired by Sophia's adventures and his own rekindled sense of purpose. In April, Thomas finally made the journey to Guatemala to visit Sophia. As his plane descended over the lush landscape, he felt a sense of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. Sophia met him at the airport, her face glowing with happiness and newfound confidence. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas immersed himself in Sophia's world, visiting the clinic where she worked and exploring the beautiful country she had come to love. He sketched constantly, filling the book Sophia had given him with images of ancient ruins, colorful markets, and the warm faces of the people they met. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Sophia's small apartment, watching the sunset over distant volcanoes, Thomas found himself thinking of Sarah. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said softly. Sophia turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I like to think she'd be proud of both of us," she replied, "for finding each other, for healing old wounds." Thomas nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. They had come so far from that first tentative meeting, building a relationship that honored Sarah's memory while forging their own unique bond. As Thomas's visit drew to a close, he and Sophia made plans for the future. She would return to the city in a few months, armed with new skills and experiences. Thomas shared his ideas for expanding his firm's focus on sustainable, community-oriented projects, inspired by what he had seen in Guatemala. They talked about taking a trip together the following year, perhaps to visit some of the places Sarah had always dreamed of seeing. As they said their goodbyes at the airport, their hug was filled with the warmth of family and the excitement of shared dreams. Back in the city, Thomas stood in his apartment, looking out at the skyline he had known for so long. The view was the same, but he saw it with new eyes. On his desk lay the sketches for a new project, a series of urban gardens inspired by Sarah's old designs and the vibrant communities he had seen in Guatemala. Next to the sketches stood a framed photo of him and Sophia, laughing together against a backdrop of ancient Mayan ruins. Thomas smiled, feeling a sense of completeness he had never known before. The journey that had begun with a surprising letter had led him to a place he never expected, a future full of love, purpose, and the joy of family rediscovered. I really hope you enjoyed the story. Please leave a comment with your views. I'm sure there will be new videos on this channel that will thrill you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. Until next time.